Hey everybody, welcome to the Effort Over Results podcast, the show for leaders, high performers, and recovering perfectionists who are finally ready to stop chasing gold stars and start showing up for what really matters. I'm your host, Quinn Magnuson, former pro athlete turned leadership coach, here to help you lead better, live bigger, and cultivate incredibly productive workplaces through an EOR mentality. Go book your free strategy call at effortoverresults.com. There is no obligation, but I can guarantee we will have a great conversation. Once again, go to effortoverresults.com, book your free call today. And today's episode is powered by podmatch.com, where podcasters and guests match to record amazing interviews. Kind of like a dating app, but less awkward. Now, back to the show. Some people find mixing faith and business to be a little controversial. In the last 20 years, it's become taboo to talk about your faith in Christianity, and especially when it comes to bringing that into business. And I'm okay if people disagree with that.
Well, I have opinions, so this will be great.
John Knowlton, welcome to the show. I want to kick things off here right away with maybe a controversial topic, controversial question. We've all heard the term church and state and how people want to separate church and state. When we talk about faith and business, some people might get the same feeling about that. And obviously with C12 Ministries, this is what you're trying to bring to the business community, really is faith-based businesses, faith-based CEOs that want to not only talk business, but they want to discuss their faith and they want to know that they're part of a community. So how would you respond to those people who say that a person's faith, their religion, what they believe really should not be brought into the workplace? What's your response to that?
Well, thank you, Quinn. I appreciate the question and the opportunity to share with your listeners and of course, have this conversation with you. Well, I can answer that several different ways, but let me just start with this. I am supremely interested in what works. So I don't really care about theories. There's all kinds of theories about how to do business or how to do life and all this. And in fact, when I was in second grade, they had a new theory about how to teach kids to read and to spell. And it took me about 8 years to recover from this theory of how to teach kids to spell that didn't teach us how to spell. So I'm interested in what works. And I'll tell you what, if you operate by the principles that have come to us from the Judeo-Christian tradition and specifically the way Jesus taught us to give first and then it will be given to you, to put other people first, to recognize that whoever would be greatest must be servant of all and least of all. Mm-hmm. If you operate on those principles, you're going to be mightily successful in business and work. And if someone has a beef with that, I'm just asking you to show me a better way. If you think forgiveness is hard, try living in unforgiveness. Show me how that's better than the way that Jesus taught. And I'm happy to stack my worldview and practice against anybody else's because I think this one is the best.
I like that answer because it number one, there's confidence in it, and it isn't necessarily just from a faith-based approach or mentality. It really is just what is best and what is best for the way people think and how they operate, and in the end, best for business. So let me dig a little deeper on that. How does someone bring that mentality to their leadership, to their company, without it necessarily going into biblical passages and sharing of their faith in and amongst the workplace? So how do you find that happy medium? Because I think what would happen is, if you have a CEO or even just a small business owner, an entrepreneur is just starting out, maybe they have 5 or 6 employees, you're probably going to have maybe 1 or 2 employees that are uncomfortable with those types of conversations, or maybe they don't feel like it really should be. So how does that business owner still bring that servant leadership, as you put it, into their company without it going over the line of offending is not the right word, going over the line of making people feel maybe a bit awkward?
Sure. Well, I think there's sort of a legal answer and then there's a
Yeah,
practical answer.
sure.
So in the United States, we have some laws around what you can do legally as a leader in a business, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the United States has some clear guidelines around what one may do and how one may express him or herself. And so in C12, we review those guidelines and we actually do some case studies, and you can't compel people to participate in a religious experience. If you wanted to have a Bible study, that should be clearly voluntary and there shouldn't be any
Yeah,
sort of
for sure.
ramifications if people don't attend, and things like that. But I tell you what, if you are a leader who leads the way that I described a minute ago or the way that Jesus describes, people are going to be very attracted to that.
Yeah,
So rather than like religious trappings, that's what people get hung up on, is
yeah.
like if you're kind of a jerk, but then you have a Bible verse on the wall, you're probably going to catch some flack for that, and you probably should, because
Yeah.
you're a jerk, not because of the scripture. But if you care about people, if you serve people, if you love people, you create a loving environment. And I don't mean exploitive. I mean
Mhm.
where
Yeah.
you genuinely put other people's interest uh, at the top of the list. That's going to be a place people love to work. I serve a guy who's runs a janitorial company, maybe 500 employees, working at night, cleaning school bathrooms. This is not glamorous work. Industry standard in the United States is something like approaching 200% turnover. And he's really sought to lead as a servant. They're down to 80% turnover now, with a goal to get to 50%. And there's some really good turnover. Like you give somebody some skills, they can go get a better job or work on a schedule that's better. That's all driven by his faith and his care for people that derives from his relationship with God. And there's nobody objecting to that.
Used the term earlier, religious trappings. And I think
Yeah.
that's the key, is that it can't make it look like we're trying to bring you into our cult. Like, but it needs to be led by example. It needs to be that servant leadership. It needs to be just be genuinely nice, compassionate, and empathetic to your employees. And one of the things that we definitely preach here at Effort Over Results is that feeling of psychological safety in the workplace. And I would like to think, if given the option of two, a faith-based leader who provides that psychologically safe environment, even though you may not agree with their religious views, but that doesn't even have to necessarily come up, but they are just being that servant leader and caring for you as an employee, as opposed to the overbearing, dictatorial, controlling business owner who barks at everybody and treats people poorly, that doesn't have a faith-based, approach. Now,
Right.
obviously those two may not go hand in hand, but it seems to me like this can be done. And obviously you and the members of C12 are proving this. I find it interesting that there's a huge difference between Canada and the United States when it comes to this. And you probably know that too, is that in Canada this doesn't really get discussed a lot, because the United States is in God we trust. I mean, it was a faith-based country when it was formed, and it continues to have that, almost that battle with the non-faith-based community, because it is such a strong element of the American society. Not so much here in Canada. People just kind of back away from it and they don't really want to talk about it. But in the United States, give me examples where CEOs, where business leaders, either in your own group in C12 or maybe even in the larger picture, large corporations, where you've seen a faith-based leadership really work and grow that company and make them become a company people want to work for.
Oh, sure. Well, I want to go back to something you said at the beginning of your comment, Quinn, and
Yeah,
if I forget to answer this one directly, just
sure.
just remind me. But part of loving people is even people who might not share your same worldview or perspective or what have you. I'll just give an example. One of the leaders in a group that I serve is head of a public school system, 8,000 students, and they have different campuses around the area. And their maintenance head was complaining that sinks kept getting ripped off the walls in the bathrooms. And I asked, where was this? And said, hey, do you suppose that you have religiously devout Muslim staff or students in these areas? Yes, I'm sure we do. Okay. They need to wash their feet before they pray 5 times a day. Do you provide a low sink for them to
Mm.
clean their feet? No. Okay. Let's accommodate their need to practice their religion the way they want to and stop ripping the sinks. I don't think they're intentionally ripping the sinks off, but trying to get your foot up into a sink, whatever, could be
That's some
cumbersome.
weak installation, John, I think.
It could be weak installation,
But I
you know.
understand what you're saying here. You're right.
But the only places where they were getting torn off was in the places in the
Oh,
communities with Muslim adherents. And so as part of his both need to run a good organization and to care for all the people, regardless of their faith, installed some new sinks that were accommodating for people to wash their feet.
hmm. That reminds me, and it seems like every podcast episode I do, the concept of curiosity, not judgment, comes up. Be
Mm,
curious, not judgmental. And now I'm flashing back to Ted Lasso. But it's interesting because the way, even in this first 10 minutes, John, the way you've described servant leadership and faith-based leadership doesn't come across oppressive or controlling, or you need to learn my way of life. And it basically, it's giving back, and it's understanding that there, for example, there are Muslim people in the community or in that school or in the business. Would you hire people of other faiths in your business? If you are a strong Christian leader, would you still hire people of other faiths? And I think the way you're approaching it and the way you describe it is is very appealing.
mhm.
It's like you said, it's non-judgmental. There's a curiosity there of when a person acts the way they act, and they are the way they are, it's like, well, why is that, right?
Right.
What do they believe? What is their worldview? And I think it's the old adage, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's the same thing with a faith-based approach. It's like you're not going to be able to convince people to become Christians or embrace the Christian faith if you force them into it, if you're constantly in their face about it. The same thing goes for any philosophy, really, and movement and approach. And so what the way you're describing it already to me feels, oh, I kind of like that. I'd much rather be part of that. I was a teacher in a Catholic school for 5 years. I'm Catholic myself, and I taught in that school for 5 years. And just the culture and environment of a faith-based school, whether it be Catholic or other, it just has a different, as the kids would say today, has a different vibe to it.
Mm,
It's just a little less confrontational. And don't get me wrong, kids, high school's high school. It's still going to be, there's going to be your pain days and you're going to have your bad days and there's still bullying going on and whatever. But it just felt to me like in that school, everything just had a little less conflict to it, a little less heightened tension to it, as opposed to the non-faith based schools. And I imagine the same goes for business. But give me an example, John, of where you've seen the opposite of where a faith-based leader has tried too hard
mm.
to incorporate faith into a company. And maybe you've had to go in and for lack of a better term, rescue that leader to let them know it's like, hey, this isn't what this is about. We're
Yeah.
trying to just be good people, not judgmental. We don't want to be hypocrites about our faith and so forth. So can you give me an example of that?
Well, I think some of the most obvious or flagrant issues are where people try to use their faith as marketing. So
Mm,
the Christian car company, or even Bernie Madoff, he was Jewish, but he preyed on other Jews.
mm,
Those were the majority of his victims, if you
yeah.
will, in his big Ponzi scheme thing were Jewish people. So it was based on affinity. And so I just get real nervous if I see anybody leading with the marketing or branding of
Mm,
Christian. You know what? Let me know, show us how you care, show us how you deliver quality, show us how you produce excellent products. You're kind to your suppliers and vendors. You're a good partner. Let's run an awesome business and then win people into relationship with you. No one's ever converted or brought to a faith by marketing or by coercion. A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And so I just really like the idea of let's be authentically winsome. Let's be attractive through the way that we interact with people, and then we can explain the why. So for the leaders, I really want them to be rooted and grounded in their own personal why. Why is it important to do excellent work? Why is it important to care about other people and to be really rooted there, as well as develop the personal habits and spiritual exercises that allow them to stay in their centered place, regardless of what the world is throwing at them? Then we can talk about how do we explain ourselves. But let's do great work and show up as excellent people, and then we'll worry about that. If you put the branding first, that's where I think we get into trouble.
Mm. Have you ever worked with or coached or consulted a company where they were faith-based, but you saw they were doing it wrong? No names.
There, there've been a couple examples, yeah, and I
Uh,
don't want to name anybody. Yeah, where sort of weak, let me say, not up to standard business practices around evaluations, reviews, coaching of employees and things like that was sort of covered up or excused by, well, they go to my church, or he's a Christian, he won't, etc. And
right.
to me, we got to be excellent. We got to be the best at
Yeah.
all the aspects: HR, sales and marketing, clarity, honesty, delivering great products and services, financial management, paying all our bills, not looking to cut corners, doing all of those things right. And so C12 is about great businesses for a greater purpose. Starts with great businesses. So that's to me, that's just really critical. And let's not try to polish over sloppy business with a faith veneer. Just doesn't
Mm.
work.
Yeah. Let's talk about C12. I read about it. I understand it. It seems to me like the concept of it is born out of other networking and business groups like Tech, TEC, maybe Entrepreneurs Organization, where basically you have a community, right? You have a community of business owners, business leaders who get together and they share challenges, struggles, celebrate together, network together. But this one obviously with the faith-based background and approach. Let's talk about C12. When what was it born out of? What was the that first moment you said we really need to start an organization like this, and tell me where it is at today.
Sure. So I didn't found C12. C12 was founded by a guy named Buck Jacobs in 1992,
Okay.
Florida. Yep. And so he has an amazing story. He was living a very hedonistic lifestyle, self-centered in California in the 70s, and he was looking for a football game on a Sunday morning. He's looking for an East Coast NFL game. But before he found the NFL game, there was a preacher on TV, and he just stopped turning the channels. Back then, you had to walk over to the TV and turn the
Yeah.
dial. And so he watched it, and he just got radically committed to Jesus right there in his living room. I
Mm.
mean, and so he
Wow.
called the only Christian guy that he knew, and the guy said, "Hey, come work with me." And he had an automotive chemicals like oils and lubricants and things like that, a business that sold those things, and he had committed his business to honor God in everything that they did. And so Buck apprenticed with this guy, worked with him for 15 or 20 years, and ultimately that business was sold to a competitor or a roll up anyways. And so Buck started, he saw the need for other Christian leaders to have a community. We call it a peer advisory group,
Mm.
but to have a community where they could kind of explore the questions you've been asking me. How do we express our faith at work? Where are the lines where we could go too far? Or how do we be a true servant leader? And he started as a nonprofit where people would come and pay minimal dues or something like this, or maybe even none. And there were two problems with it. The first was, since it was run as a nonprofit, the business guys and gals thought he didn't know anything about running a business. And then second, because they didn't have much skin in the game, their commitment level was low. And so he's
Mm.
like, okay, need to redo this. And started it as a for-profit enterprise with higher levels of commitment. And there are around 200 people like me who are called C12 chairs around the world. Brazil is our fastest growing area.
Well,
We've recently started in South Africa, which is growing quite quickly, and even Ukraine. Someone in Ukraine a couple of years ago called our CEO, Mike Sharrow, and said, "Hey, we need C12 in Ukraine." And Mike said, "Don't you guys have a war going on? What's that got to do with it?" So, yeah, so maybe Ukraine's next. I don't know. But so there's more than 4,000 business leaders who attend a monthly forum with their peer group to focus on building great organizations for a greater purpose.
So what does C12 look like in your region, in the Kalamazoo, Western Michigan region?
Yeah, in West Michigan, there are 3 chairs. Myself, a fella in the Holland, Michigan area, and my colleague Danielle Hua leads forums in Grand Rapids, South Bend, Indiana, and St. Joseph, Michigan. And then I've
Mhm.
got a couple groups in Kalamazoo. So we each month there's a day-long business retreat, and that's actually sort of the biggest hurdle for most leaders. To a whole day? Oh my
Right.
gosh!
Yeah.
9 a.m. to 4 p.m.
The text
And
the same way. It's a lot of time involved. Yeah.
absolutely. And so each day, each of those forum days, we've got a structure to it where we cover some content in the mornings and some aspect of great businesses that you'd expect in any sort of business class. And then we always have a segment thinking about ministry. How do we think of our business as our primary ministry? And then in the afternoon, one of the members will do a deep dive on his or her organization to give us all some good background to help provide great advice on a key question or two that they have. And then we end each day with open forum where anyone can bring any issue, personal or business, for advice and counsel to the group. And then I also coach the members each month as well.
How do you grow groups like that? Because here's a good example. I had a meeting with a former client of mine a few weeks ago, and just through casual conversation, I think he just said, him and his wife had just returned from church, and he was telling this story about something, and I was like, and that piqued my interest right away. And so we started talking about, his business being faith-based, and I didn't know that about him prior to that, and I'd been working with him for a couple of years, and that's what I'm saying about, faith-based business owners, and maybe this is just Canada, I don't know, but you might find it in the States too, that they don't often bring it up, and maybe they don't feel the need to, which is, probably a good thing. But he brought it up, and I asked him, I said, I'm interested. How does your faith-based approach, work within your company? And he had 50 some employees at the time, and that's a lot of employees to have, and I'm sure a lot of them don't share his worldview. How do you, and he said exactly what you said at the start. This isn't about preaching to them. It isn't about having Bible studies. It's basically just about just being a good owner, being a servant leader. So, how do you get people to open up about those sorts of things? Because I'm sure you're going to have your business owners out there that are very boisterous about their faith, and that's great. But then you're going to be the ones that like, well, I don't know if I want to bring this up for fear that it might hurt business. How do you get them to come out of the come out from behind the curtain, so to speak, to let people know this and be part of a group like C12, or just to even just take pride in the fact that they are a faith-based owner?
Yeah, so there could be some cultural differences, of course, between Canada and the US and even in different regions. We use some data from Barna Research to identify how many likely Christian business owners are in any given territory. And they're a research organization, so they use their own methodologies. But we have a sense of how many businesses are in a territory and how many people are Christian enough to be part of C12. And then it's my job or the chair's job to find them. And so there's different ways, and there's ways like looking at LinkedIn to see, did they go to a Christian college, or
Okay. Yeah.
do on their websites, do they post their values, and do
Hmm.
they seem to be based on biblical principles? Or
Right.
sometimes people have a Bible verse on their something, or they've given money they donate to, or they're on the boards of Christian organizations. So those kind of give us some clues about who to look for. And then of course, like any kind of business, we once we have an established group, people will say, hey, my friend so and so, might be a good fit for the group. But yeah, so how would I do it in Canada? I don't know. I've never been Canadian. So
It's definitely, it's there, like you said, it's regional. There's obviously cultural differences between Canada and the United States in general, but then it's also regional, even within the United States. I mean, you're going to have your Bible Belt, right? You're going to have the Deep South. Maybe it's a little bit different in the Pacific Northwest, right? In Canada, you also will have that. Like I know even in our province where we are, the Southwest corner is the Bible Belt of our province.
okay.
And so people will talk a little bit more openly and freely about it because they know that they have, for lack of a better term, support. People in their area agree with them, right? Let's talk about this. because I still want to talk about the challenges that, Christian CEOs or faith-based CEOs, business owners, even small business owners face. We talked about it a little bit, but what are the most common challenges that they face when trying to integrate faith into their business practices? What do you see most commonly?
Well, I don't know if this is unique to Christian leaders, but it's common at least. And
Yeah.
it's around holding people accountable and asking employees or executives to hold to a standard of conduct and then, impose the appropriate sanctions including termination. A lot of Christian business leaders that I've interacted with don't want to let people go, or they give a lot of rope or things. And I know there's this sort of sense in the media that business owners are just, these ruthless, cutthroat people. And, Donald Trump, his famous line on The Apprentice was, "You're fired," as if that
Yeah.
was something to celebrate. And I just don't find that to be true at all. And in fact, it goes the other way. Hey, you've been talking about Susie here for 3 years, what are we going to do here?
Yeah.
And the reality is, once you solve a problem like that, either through performance management or managing somebody out of the organization, everybody else is like, thank goodness you finally did that. And
Mm.
so I think there may be a little extra pressure for the Christian CEOs for whom it's known that they're Christians, that they want to be extra about not playing into that jerk boss stereotype.
Yeah. But it's almost like, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, it's almost like they try to go to the opposite end of the spectrum to prove they're not like that. And then they become almost too nice. So, for example, someone, maybe gets let go, gets fired, and it's a performance-based firing, but they retort and say, I thought you were a Christian. Well, how Christian is this when, I have a family and, a spouse and kids to feed and you're firing me, right?
Right.
This is where the line gets either crossed or blurred when you bring faith and I would call it faith and finance, but faith and business together. And that's got to be very difficult for a faith-based owner because they are trying to have Christian values, but at the same time, then people place them in a particular box as to how they should act. And that
Yeah.
would be a common challenge.
Well, I think that's right, but I also believe the solution is running an excellent HR process all
Yeah.
the way from
Yeah.
recruiting, selection, onboarding, evaluation, how you doing reviews, how you providing performance feedback, and all that. So
Yeah.
if we get sloppy with that stuff, then the termination starts to get mixed up. But if you're doing that really well, there should be no question for anybody about, are you firing me because you're a mean boss, or no, man, here's the 6 reviews where we talk about
Yeah.
you need to show up on time or whatever the case is. So really doing excellent pure business skills can help to mitigate those, those kind of the commingling that you just mentioned.
I imagine it would almost subconsciously force the owner to become a better business owner just because they can't let that stigma be attached to them of them being a Christian owner and now they're making all the decisions from a Christian based approach. It's like, well, no, we have HR foundations, we have sales and marketing foundations. Those are still all business decisions, and we
Right.
still do everything right by the book, by labor laws and so forth. And this isn't a decision that we're making lightly based on our Christian Judeo values. It really is just a business decision. But yeah, I imagine there's lots of owners out there that struggle with that. And I would appreciate that C12 probably is a group that helps coach people through that. And you share challenges and you share what you're going through and how to handle those certain things. So I imagine it would improve business, by doing that. So that's awesome that happens.
That's where the power of
Yeah,
the peers come
for
in,
sure.
Quinn,
Yeah.
is that the peers who've all sat in that seat and had those same kind of issues can say, "Hey, you've been talking about Susie here for 3 months in a row," or whatever the case is, and you got to be fair to the rest of your team, and either she's got to perform or she's got to go.
Yeah.
So that's really helpful to hear that from each other as well.
For sure. Sharing and sharing stories is incredibly powerful. And this it doesn't even have to be faith-based, John, right? Like even just your standard business owner. I don't know if that's the opposite to this, but even just in business, you still have to develop foundational infrastructure for HR, people strategies, for sales, for marketing, and everything, regardless of faith, that allow you to run a more productive and profitable and efficient business, right? And those are the things that should be in place, especially in the hiring side of things and HR side of things.
Well, I'll tell you, I was in a peer group when I was running a wealth management business, and it wasn't a Christian business. There was no C12 in my area at the time, but the rigor, if you will, of going to my peers once a month and telling them what I was planning to do and showing up next month, did I do it or not do it, was incredible. Yeah. So in 2015, I joined a peer group and had expansion goals, pretty substantial goals for growth. And after a few months, we hadn't really made a lot of traction on it. And so the group prompted me to do a time study on myself. How are you spending your work time, John? And so for 2 weeks, I recorded what I was doing in 15-minute increments. And I'll tell you, if you don't have to do it, don't do it. It's brutal. But at the end of that, I had over 400 data points.
Hmm.
And so I this was before AI was commonly available. So I manually sorted them into buckets and realized, okay, there are four main buckets of how I'm spending my time. And we had previously identified mergers and acquisitions as our primary growth opportunity. And if, it's predictable that was getting the least amount of my attention. And so that prompted me to make two key hires, someone to take some of my personal client load, and then someone to be dedicated full time to doing administrative tasks related to the mergers and acquisitions. And in the next 5 years, we 10x'd the organization. And so the discipline of showing up every month to tell your peers what you're planning to do and what you did is incredible. It's perhaps the most powerful
Yeah.
tool for progress in a business.
Well, and this is why peer groups and networking groups are very popular, and the ones that are run really well and have a structure to it obviously really support business owners. I ran one here in our region that was the group became so close at that you start sharing stories of family trips and you just become, because in business goes at the speed of trust, right? And this is where you can build that trust. You don't want to create a silo effect or a clique when it comes to, it's like, well, I only do business with C12 owners and businesses, but you are able to at least meet once a month, like you said, or maybe more often, to share those experiences, to know that you're not alone. And I think that's what all business owners really need is that forum, regardless of faith-based or not, C12, Tech, EO, any of those. It's just a chance to share the pain you're going through, because being a business owner, I don't care whether you own a $50,000 corner store or a $50 million manufacturing company, the problems are kind of the same. They're just bigger
Yep.
or smaller. And everybody needs to share those stories and then learn from each other and to know you're not alone out there. Um, I want to talk about your upcoming book, January 2026, Thinking for Success. And I went onto Amazon and I found it. I was like, I really need to grab this, but then I realized it doesn't come out till January. But let's talk about the book. So what insights can you share from the upcoming book, Thinking for Success? And really, what is the philosophy and what are you trying to tell people in that book?
Well, I'm thankful that you assume I have a philosophy, which I do.
Well,
But
we all should.
yeah, most people it's hard to articulate, right?
Yeah.
So, any case, I believe that our outcomes are a result of our behaviors, which are all rooted in our thinking. And so, I'm really aiming essentially my life's work going forward towards helping people think better. And the book really came out of my experience as a business leader, seeing people that work for me kind of do the same mistakes again and again, or run into the same problems and hurdles. And I realized, oh gosh, this is a thinking problem. And so I would encounter one of these things, and then in a staff meeting, I would think of a story that was similar, either from history, literature, my own life, whatever. Tell the story, and then kind of a one sentence conclusion or moral of the story. And then we'd give it a name, so that now once we've all processed this story together and we understand, and the conclusion is, here's what we should do. Now we've got a handle. And so I could just say, hey, Mobile, sounds like your Mobile is bouncing around, or what, that was the name of a story. And it started to help. People could, rather than me giving them a theory or a philosophy or even a SOPs, standard operating procedures, if they could think better, then they could work their way through the problems. And so after a period of time, I said, gosh, I'm going to forget these stories. So I started to write them down. And then some years later, I realized I've got 40 of these things.
Hmm.
Hey, brilliant light bulb. If I had 52, that'd be one a week for a year, like that. So I kept writing them and got to 70 or something like that, and hired some editors to pick the best 52 and make them sound a lot better and spell everything right. So in any case, the book is 52 stories that upgrade your thinking to boost productivity, problem solving, and relationships. And it's really designed for people to use in a small group or at a staff meeting or an executive team or whatever, just as a little short story to help us all grapple with how are we thinking and potentially be aware of, cognizant of what we're thinking, and change that going forward so that our outcomes are better.
Let's tease our audience a little bit. Give me an example of a chapter. I'm assuming 52 chapters potentially, each one having a story. Give us
Yeah.
an example of a story you told in the book that may be one of your favorites, and the outcome of it. That what was the moral of the story, and really what was
Sure.
the result?
Yeah, and I'll this chapter I'll make available to your listeners and viewers. They could just go to the website abundantthoughtrevolution.com, and they can download that, as well as a little video I recorded on how to use the chapter in a meeting. This is called Creativity in a Box. So we've heard we should think outside the box, right? But I'm saying there's some creativity available to us by staying in the box. So everybody remembers the movie Indiana Jones. And Harrison Ford is making his way across the world, fighting through bad guys and whatnot. In one of the scenes, he's facing off against this guy with like two scimitars, and he's doing the sword fighting and kind of really elaborate choreography. And the guy gets right up to Harrison Ford, and he just pulls out his pistol and shoots him. And that's the end of the scene. Everyone remembers the scene. That's not how it was written. It
Oh,
was written with Harrison Ford having an equally elaborate choreography. So they were to have this fight where they go all around the courtyard and up the walls and all this kinds of stuff. But Ford woke up that morning, the day of filming, with the flu, a bad case of the flu. He said, I can't work today. But the film production crew had already spent all this money. They'd hired extras, they'd blocked off the streets, they had the dollies and the lights and everything in place. Their budget would not allow them to book it again, to reschedule it. They had to do it that day. And so Ford said, well, I can stand there and shoot him. And so they just had Ford stand there, pull out his pistol and shoot the guy, and went back to his trailer to sleep. The iconic scene was a result of the financial constraints of the production budget. And we would never probably remember the elaborate fight scene that was choreographed. But because it was so unexpected, there was creativity in the box. So here's the box is the financial constraint. We have all kinds of constraints. We have marketing constraints, we have time constraints, we have money constraints, we've got resource constraints. How can we solve whatever our problem is with the constraints that we have? And there's some exercises you can do. What if we had $50,000 to solve this problem? What would we do? Okay. Well, what if we had $1,000? What if we had $100? And going through a process like that kind of gets your creativity going, where you can think about, if we had to get a result, but we had no money or whatever it was, how do we get her done? And so we often think the answer is more resources, when the answer is often more creativity.
yeah. Well, you say more resources, but if you don't have the ability to create more resources, and I love that analogy because I distinctly remember having several conversations with business owners where they say, "Oh, we need to add on to the building and expand, or we need to add more people," and I'm like, "Whoa." Do you really need a bigger building, or do you need to clean up and organize and make this area a lot more efficient? right? You're going to save a lot more money by just basically cleaning the house before you decide to add a garage. The same thing with people. It's like, do you really need a sales manager, or do you just want to pawn, work off on someone else because you as an owner want to do something else? You want to add $100,000 salary when you really don't have that money. So I love what you're saying. It's not about more resources. It's about how can we as creative and as an efficient as a possible with what we already have, or less or more, and be creative about it. And one of the things that I speak to in my book, In Effort Over Results, and what I when I do my keynote speeches is telling companies, you want your people to be creative. You want them to have psychological safety in the workplace so they feel they can be innovative and creative and come up with new ideas and express those ideas without fear of, punishment or retribution or being made fun of even. That's where companies really grow and thrive, is where your people, number one, come to work and feel safe. They come to work joyfully. They don't have the Sunday scaries, and they're happy to come to work Monday morning. And then they feel like they can express themselves, without fear of being made fun of or chastised or whatever. That's where companies grow and thrive. And so that analogy of what you were saying, it's about, no, it's not necessarily about resources. It's like, how excuse me, how can we be creative with what we currently have?
Yeah.
Let's wrap things up, John. Tell me, what is, obviously the book is coming out in January. What else do you have on the go in terms of continuing maybe to grow C12 in the Michigan area, or even your own company? Let's talk about you and what you're doing specifically. And then if you want to promote your social media and the website, let's do that as well.
Oh, thank you.
Huh.
So my wife and I have been parenting for 28 years, and our youngest of four is a senior in high school this coming year. And so she's, for the last 28 years, she's been pretty focused on the kids and the family, and I've been focused on the world, getting resources for the family. And we've now got this amazing opportunity to do things together. And so we've started this company, Abundant Thought Revolution, which, as I said, is really aimed at helping people think better. And so that website has a growing list of resources and videos. That Thinking for Success is the first book, but all really aimed at helping people think better so that they can have a more abundant life and rich life. And so we're standing up some mastermind groups and some courses that are very specific at different elements. And one of the most fun things that we're doing right now is we've invited our adult children into what I call shared governance of family wealth. And so rather than thinking about our savings and our money as mom and dad's to do with as we wish until we die and then drop a load of money on unprepared children, we've invited them into decision making with us. And so I'm running our family board as I would any other business. We've gone through a mission, vision, values, or exercises. We've stood up an investment committee and a philanthropy committee, and my oldest daughter leads the philanthropy committee, and we're doing some real estate development together, and kids are participating in the selection and all that. And it's just a really, really cool experience. And I know not every family can be open or feel psychologically safe to be open about money like that. But I'm also coming alongside other families that are interested in doing that. I was in wealth management for 25 years. And while I no longer advise on investments, I'm happy to help families start to work through that process. So fun stuff. I'm energized every day. It's so exciting.
That's bold to allow your children. I realize they're adults, but to allow your children, because it's funny. I love how you said, we've been parenting for 28 years. So I love that term. But some people say, oh, babysitting, but just allowing even your adult children to take part in those discussions. And I think that's really important. I think we will always see our children as our children, even into our 70s and 80s. We'll see our 50-year-old children as our children, right? They're always going to be our baby boy and baby girl. But to bring them into the family discussions over generational wealth, where do you want to invest? The philanthropy thing, which is incredible. I love that. And you're right. Some families maybe don't have the dynamics to do that. But what a brilliant idea to do that within a family. Because I think, we talk about employees. It's like when you can get the employees to buy in and you give them input, they have more skin in the game and they feel more compelled to put the effort in and to be really part of something. And I think that's extremely important. I want to go back to the think better thing, and I realize I'm now rewinding a bit. But when you say think better, so a lot of the podcasts I listen to talk about, we need to stop just thinking about things. We need to start doing, right? Don't think, just do. And I think that they go hand in hand, obviously, right? But there's a lot of people who think about starting a podcast, Think about starting a business. They plan for it. They're waiting for the perfect conditions, and it never happens. It's almost like procrastination and perfection are one and the same. How do we think better but also act and produce? Tell me what think better means, John, in obviously in the book, and what you how you want people to think better, but then what does that result in?
Sure. Well, I believe that everybody was created for a purpose, and
Mhm.
success is getting closer and closer. There's a term that you might remember from geometry called an asymptote, where a line or a curve approaches the axis but
Right.
never touches it. So I don't think we'll ever be perfectly touching our purpose, but thinking better allows us to more fully actualize what our purpose is.
Mhm.
And so people have all kinds of thoughts that don't lead them towards their purpose. Thoughts of comparison, or I'm not good enough, or I'm insecure, or
Limiting
what are
beliefs.
people going to think of me? All of those
Yeah.
kinds of things. And so my philosophy is if we can get our thinking a little bit better, then we're much more likely to take the right next step that will lead us more fully into our purpose. So I'm just rather than saying do this, do this, do this, I'm just going one step upstream to say let's think a little bit better, and so you're more likely to do the right next step.
So the things you had just mentioned there, and I kind of cut in a little bit, but I mentioned limiting beliefs.
Yes.
And that is something that we all have. It comes from, a fixed mindset approach of I'm only so good at something. I'm better at this, but I'm not good at that. And then you hear, life coaches say the word yet. I'm not good at that, but then you would add yet to it. So
Right.
when it comes to the better thinking and people have limiting beliefs and short of going to counseling or therapy to figure out what that is, how would you approach that person in getting them to think better? Because I'm still trying to dig down deep into, you can't just tell people to think better, obviously. You need people to have an approach to it. And like I said, sometimes it takes counseling and coaching. But how would you counsel somebody who maybe has those limiting beliefs, who believes poorly in their skills and abilities and but still wants to grow? How do you coach them through that?
Yeah. Two things. The first is, as far as we know, we're the only creatures that have the ability to think about what we think about. So my dog over there, just food, man, and give me a scratch on the ears.
Yeah.
He's not really processing that. We can. We can. And I suspect most people can identify at least one of their limiting beliefs because it stares them in the face every
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
So being becoming conscious and aware of what are those thoughts and then changing our default thinking. So if that's our we can actually use that as a trigger to change what our default is. So that unbidden thought comes, I'm not good enough. Okay. When that comes, rather than letting that take residence, could I use that as a trigger to replace it with something better, such as I've accomplished these things in my past and I will accomplish more in the future, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
For me, it happens to be the 23rd Psalm. When I get anxious or irritated or feel limited, for me personally, to say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack any good thing. And then I go through the rest of it. So that's the first approach, is to be cognizant of what our thoughts are and then use those unbidden thoughts as trigger to replace them with something better. So I encourage people to even write down what is a positive thought I can replace negative thoughts with.
Mm.
St. Paul told us if there's anything good or true or honorable or lovely, think on these things, not the other things. The second approach that I use is story. So as the book is 52 stories. If I say, a priest and a rabbi walked into a bar, you want to know what happens, right? It opens what we call a story loop. And so it kind of short circuits the negative thinking because just the way that our brains work, we want to know about the conclusion to the story. And so stories are the second technique or approach that I use to help people change their thinking.
That's interesting. The Bible verse that I use for effort over results is there's profit in all labor.
Hmm.
And I believe that truly that our confidence in ourselves comes from action, not thought. I don't think you can think yourself into confidence. And if you have, it's a false confidence. I think
Mm,
confidence comes from action and growing a body of evidence of work that you've done that proves that you are who you say you are. And that's really where, and when I say profit in all labor, meaning it's like good labor, bad labor. If you're working towards something and you maybe failed at it, you're still learning from it. There is truly profit in all labor. And I think that's where, where thought and action come together.
yeah,
But I definitely believe that it is action that helps us build that confidence, right? I
sure,
don't think you can just sit back and think yourself into being, better necessarily, but I think you're thinking better along with that action. The two are so powerful, right?
sure.
Because
Yeah,
you do have to think about what it is that you want to do, but then you can't sit on it and wait on it. You need to
that's
actually
true.
act upon
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
No, that's for
Excellent.
sure. One of the
Yeah.
stories in the book is called the productivity triquation, and that it actually comes from Hiram Smith, who wrote, well, gosh, I can't remember the full name of his book, but he started the Franklin Covey
Okay.
company.
Yeah.
Remember the big planners that people used to carry around?
Sure.
The Franklin Covey planners,
Yeah.
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 Productivity triquation is essentially what you're talking about. He uses fancy words for it, but it's basically here's my intention, here's my action, and then here's the outcome and how do I feel about it. And if I had a positive outcome, then I'm going to feel better and I'm more likely to do the right next step. If I, let's say I was supposed to make a sales call and I sorted my emails instead, now I have this feeling, well, I didn't get a good outcome. And I have a feeling that I'm the type of person who doesn't get good outcomes. And so you're less likely. So there's a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle.
Yeah. I want to ask you some quick questions to finish up here. Let's people are obviously they start doing what they do. So for example, I know you didn't start C12, but obviously it's part of the motivation in your life and faith-based. But let's talk about your influences. So your influence in business, your influence in well I like to call them, or well, I'm not the first person to say this, the three or four F's, right? Faith, family, finance, things like that. What are your influences? Who do you look to? Are there podcasts you listen to? Is it a book you've read recently that really has given you the energy to continue doing what you're doing? Because for me, it's all over the place, many different podcasts and influences. What is it for you?
Well, I certainly have lots of inputs and I'm not only a producer, but a big consumer of podcasts. So I listen to all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Business. I listen to all things that I don't agree with. I was in the car driving on a long road trip with a buddy one time, and someone was talking, and expressing her opinion, and he said, "How can you listen to that? She's wrong." I'm like, you know what? The only way we can change is to have ideas that are outside of our current understanding, Doug. And
Yeah.
so he wasn't interested in changing though. So, but yeah, so I still listen to a lot of market based, investment podcasts. I listen to All In, although
Oh
those
yeah.
guys are getting more into politics than into
Right.
tech and investing. I read the Bible every single day, and probably my best teacher was a guy named Dallas Willard, who was a philosophy professor at the University of Southern California. But
Mm.
he makes very clear that Jesus' whole point and purpose was to make access to the kingdom of God available. And the kingdom of God in his concept is the will of God, what God wants and the resources that come along with that. And so for me, being connected every single day and starting my day, getting my mind shaped by the the ancient scriptures that have proven to be successful and useful and helpful and profitable for millennia. So I have daily declarations that come from the Bible, and I start by saying, God, I'm saying your words in your presence to change my thinking.
I want to ask a controversial question again because what you just said brought this up in my mind is what ruins Christianity for people? People who maybe were and then fell away from the flock, or people who maybe never were and are like, I want no part of that. What ruins Christianity?
Religion is a controlling spirit. I don't care if it's the religion of Christianity or of Islam or of woke culture or
Mm.
of whatever. Religion is distasteful for a lot of people. And so that's why I really emphasize what works and access to God. And I try to really push away I earlier called trappings or veneer of religion. The religion part is what bothers people. Most people are cool with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so bring
Troll.
Jesus.
It's
Yeah.
the control and the rules and the need to do this or you're going to hell. I mean, that's what I grew up in. Like my
Yeah.
grandfather was a Baptist minister, and it was things like the devil makes work for idle hands. If you don't do this, God will see you, Jesus will see you, and you're going to hell. Like just those sayings that just made
Yeah.
people feel really controlled. And it's like, I don't
Right.
want to be part of of a religion. And like you
Yep.
said, the term religion can mean anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily biblically based or faith based. Religion could be the religion of college football, but it is those trappings and the term and trap, right? You
Yeah.
feel
It's a trap.
trapped by other people's rules and guidelines, and
Yeah.
it's not what you're selling, John, it's how you sell it. I mean, that's a marketing 101 rule, but when you think
Yeah.
about it, I can probably be convinced of most things if it's sold to me in the way that is appealing to me and allows me to figure it out on my own time.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, like you nailed it on the head, where Christianity goes wrong sometimes, are people that force it down other people's throats, that say there's all these rules and regulations you have to follow. It'd be no different than a workplace. If you came into a workplace and you were basically told all these trappings and traps and rules and regulations and control, I don't really want to work there, right? You have certain guidelines. We abide by certain values, but at the same time, we also are open to understanding that everyone's a little different. And so that's interesting. And then going back to the original conversation we had today is how do we marry faith and finance, faith and business together without it being repelling to people who maybe want to work for that company? It's like, well, I don't know if I want to work for them if it feels like it's just going to be Bible study every, Monday morning. And it's like, well, no, that's not what we do here. I mean, we're
Right.
just trying to provide a good environment for people and give them good employment and be servant leaders, right?
Yeah.
So it's tough. So I wanna finish off with this. Let's give people one message. And when I say the people that are listening, maybe there's business owners out there that are faith-based in their own lives, but struggle to maybe bring that forward in their business. What would you tell them? What's a piece of advice that you would tell them to give them that confidence to start to bring that out a little bit without it being, like I said before, repelling to potentially their employees or future employees?
Well, I'll just go back and quote Jesus again and say,
Yeah.
whoever would be great among you must be least of all and servant of all. If you can do that, you're going to have an amazing business and it's going to be attractive to people. Nobody is attracted to people who are seeking their own good. It stinks.
Yeah.
And so if we can serve other people genuinely with our hearts, that's going to be a good for business, and it will win people to they will want to know, why are you like you? Why are you like this? Why are you willing to do this? And then you've won the opportunity to speak of God.
Beautiful. Let's end on that, John. John Knowlton, thank you very much for being part of the EOR podcast today. It was a wonderful conversation. I love bringing different mindsets from all over the world. I realize you and I are neighbors here in Canada, United States, but really anybody who brings a new philosophy, a new thought process, a new way of thinking, whether we agree with it or not, it's important to hear other people, because every conversation is an opportunity. I truly believe that, and it's an opportunity for us to learn. And today, I think my listeners learned a lot. So thank you for being on the podcast today.
Oh, thanks so much. Great pleasure. And I pray it was a blessing.